The night was cold, and the wind blew steadily over the treetops. On the wall stood a solitary figure, gazing off into the darkness of the forest, his mind haunted by memories. He had failed to save his friend and failed to keep his promise to Sakura. What was his way of the ninja worth if he couldn't even save those few who he cared about? How many days had it been? He wasn't sure. He spent his days in fitful slumber haunted by nightmares, and his nights were spent exactly as he was now, gazing out into the forest, seeking answers. He let himself drift, reflecting on all that had happened since he passed the Genin exam, trying to find some fault in his actions, somewhere he had gone wrong. There must have been a way to save Sasuke. He refused to allow himself to think otherwise. He thought about Kakashi and Irika, those who had tried to teach him everything there was to know about being a ninja. He thought about Sakura, who he now realized would never have eyes for anyone other than the bastard, and of the various other people whom he has had the, sometimes, pleasure of knowing. Konohamaru, Lee, Niji Sandaime, Tsunade, Jiraiya, Shikamaru, Chuji, Hinata, and Kiba. He immersed himself in memories. Naruto blinked and looked up at the sky, feeling a drop of water on his face. Within minutes, a light rain was covering Konoha. He laughed bitterly to himself as more painful memories surfaced. Memories of time spent in idle banter with Haku in the forest, of the inevitable fight they fought simply because they were on different sides, and some of the last words the boys had uttered. "Please hurry and kill me. I'm sorry that you had to stain your hands. Please fulfill your dreams." My dreams. My dream to become Hokage, to gain everyone's respect, and to never take back my words. My dreams are a joke. Naruto broke. He fell to his knees and let his tears mingle with the rain. I've been wasting my time. What would Zabuza and Haku think of me now? I once thought they were evil, but they both died in contentment, fighting for those they loved most. Of all things, he believed that to be true, and sometimes it was all that kept him going. When he seemed doomed, he tried to remember the look Zabuza had had on his face, tears running down it, as he had fought to avenge Haku with nothing but a kunai in his mouth. There had been fury, despair, and love. Zabuza, killer of 100, demon of the hidden mist, had loved Haku like a son, and in return had gotten love and loyalty above any other. Naruto looked up into the sky and wondered if he would ever be able to understand those feelings, and suddenly felt a need to escape. He jumped off the wall onto the slightly damp forest floor and dashed off into the darkness. In years to come, he would look upon this as one of the most irrational decisions he had ever made, but it was always followed up with a laugh and the comment that it was also one of the best. Originally, Naruto had no idea where he was going. He just felt the need to run. He pushed himself to the limit, trying to escape the past by exhausting his body. He ran for what felt like hours, the rain splattering on his face as he was assaulted by memories. He continued to run long into the night, and he collapsed under a tree just as dawn was breaking and immediately fell into a blissfully dreamless sleep. Naruto woke groggily to the sound of birds chirping. He sat up against the tree and, shading his face with one hand, glanced at the sun. It seemed to be late afternoon, as the sun was high and the puddles of water from the previous night's rain were already starting to dry up. He stood up and stretched, letting out a long yawn, and took note of his surroundings. All the peace his previous night's exertions had given him vanished as soon as he realized where he was. This was where he had had his first experience fighting enemy shinobi. He and his team had fought the Demon Brothers here, and he had, under this very same tree, sworn an oath on pain as he jabbed a kunai into his hand to bleed out poison. He couldn't help but laugh at the irony. He had run right into the hands of the same experiences he had been trying to escape. He wondered idly if anyone in Konoha was worried about him, but brushed it off immediately. No one in Konoha would notice even if he disappeared from right under their noses. He froze at this thought and glanced at the path that led to Wave Country. He turned around in a circle, looking at all the scenery around him, and for the first time in weeks, he had a true smile on his face. "Why not?" he called out to the empty forest. I could use a vacation, and it's been far too long since I did anything for myself, and it will be nice to see how that brat Inari has grown." Having thoroughly convinced himself, and with nothing but the cloths on his back and 13 shoken, Naruto eagerly dashed down the long road to Wave Country. Despite his initial enthusiasm, hours of walking had dampened Naruto's spirits. There are very few things, he decided, more boring than traveling long distances by yourself. He was soon playing games with himself, seeing how far he could jump from one tree to another or pretending to be stalking an imaginary enemy, but these were only temporary distractions, so pretty soon he decided to just run again. It took only 4 days to reach the borders of Wave Country, and it was with great relief that a chakra-depleted Naruto flopped up against the side of the bridge that had altered his life forever, and just watched the people go by. Waiting to regain some of his stamina, Naruto wandered around the relatively small city that was the capital of Wave Country in awe. It was completely different from how it had been but a short time ago. Shopkeepers called out into the packed markets, and fresh fruit and vegetables from all corners of the globe filled produce carts. The city appeared to now be a central hub of trade. Naruto's explorations eventually led him to the center of town, where he was more than shocked to see a large stone monument in the middle of a small park. It had a simple pyramid shape and was about 6 feet high, and each side was inscribed with the symbol of the hidden leaf. After a short prayer at the monument, Naruto realized he had to stop stalling. He was tired, had no food or clothing, and was broke. He knew logically there was no reason to be afraid of Tazuna and his family. They were his friends, but he hadn't exactly given them any warning, so he was understandably nervous. He eventually did manage to work up his nerve and make his way to Tazuna's house, only to find that it was no longer there. With a sigh, Naruto went to a neighbor and knocked on the door. "Yeah, what do I want?" came the rather annoyed-sounding voice from inside the house. I was wondering if you knew where Tazuna the bridge builder is living?" Tazuna. The door opened slightly and a middle-aged man peeked out. He moved out a month ago, got into the trade business, and got himself and his daughter a better house near the market. Who wants to know? Naruto improvised, using mostly the truth. "I'm an old friend of Inari, the grandson, and figured I'd visit as I passed through the country." The man shrugged his shoulders and gave Naruto the address. Naruto got somewhat upset when he arrived at said address to find he had passed the very house earlier that day, but he was sufficiently impressed. It looked as though the old man had done well for himself after the bridge was finished. The house was no mansion, but it was 3 stories and looked brand new. Now very tired of traveling, he trudged up to the door and gave 3 sharp knocks. Not a moment later, a voice, which Naruto recognized as belonging to Tsunami, called out from inside the house. "Be there in a minute, Inari. Stop throwing those knives." Naruto's sweat dropped as the sounds of a struggle were heard from within the house. A moment later, a somewhat stressed-looking Tsunami opened the door. "I'm very sorry, sir. My son likes to play ninja with kitchen knives and Naruto." Naruto's sweat dropped again as Tsunami spun around and yelled back into the house. "Dad." "Inari." It's Naruto at the front door. The sound of pounding feet could be heard, and Tsunami stepped out of the way as Naruto found himself flying backwards, the victim of a tackle hug, and landed rather firmly on his behind, only to see a somewhat larger than he remembered Inari grinning at him from his seat on Naruto's stomach. 20 minutes and 2 tackling houseguest lectures later, they were all sitting down to a late-night snack of instant ramen in the dining room. "So, Naruto, what brings you all the way out here?" Tazuna inquired. "Not that I'm not happy to see you, but I would expect that you'd be with your team." Naruto didn't have the heart to tell them that Sasuke had betrayed the leaf, so he again used his improvisation skills. "I just had some personal vacation time and decided I'd come see how you were all doing." He accented this with his trademark fox grin. Inari grinned back, and Tsunami looked like she believed him, but Tazuna raised his eyebrows slightly. "Well," Tazuna said, "you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. As you can see," he gestured around, "my trade business is booming, so don't hesitate to ask if you need anything." "Thanks for the offer, Tazuna-san," Naruto replied, "but right now I want nothing more than a soft bed." Tsunami, if you would be so kind as to show our guest to his soft bed, Tazuna laughed. We'll let him get some sleep. Tsunami led Naruto up to what appeared to be a guest room on the third floor, and he was more than happy to discover that the bed was much softer than the second-hand junk he had at home. His last thought before he drifted off was, maybe I should consider staying here for a while. Naruto woke up before sunrise the next morning and sat up against the wall. It had been almost 6 days since anyone had seen him in Konoha. Another 10 days before that he had returned from his failed mission. 16 days. He could still feel the sting where Sakura had slapped him. Could he really blame her? He had made a promise he couldn't keep, and it wasn't like she owed him anything. It's not like had helped her before. After all, wasn't it Sasuke who had defeated Haku to protect his friend? Sasuke who had protected them in the Forest of Death? Sasuke who saved her ungrateful ass from Gaara? Naruto blinked at where his previous train of thought had taken him. It was rare for him to be this bitter. He had years of practice with being abused. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that no one would cry for him if he never went back. Sure, Tsunade would be sad, but her duties would quickly consume her life and he would be forgotten. Jiraiya had left Konoha again, so it might take him years to even find out that Naruto had left. Damn, now he was just being depressing. Naruto jumped out of bed, looked around the room to see his cloths laying, clean and folded, on a table near the door. He silently blessed Tsunami as he rushed to get dressed. Tazuna was peaceful. He was the only one ever up this early, so he spent his time drinking green tea in meditative reflection. He was calm, one with himself and his surroundings. Then came Naruto. Like an orange bullet, Naruto bounced into the kitchen. Good morning. Tazuna-san, he called, causing Tazuna to spit out his mouth full of green tea and glare balefully at the boy who had the nerve to be this energized this early in the morning. Good morning, Naruto. Would you care for some tea? Tazuna asked, but Naruto waved him off. So, old man, where do you keep your instant ramen? Tazuna blinked. Ramen. There isn't any here. I don't like the instant stuff, and my daughter won't let Inari touch the stuff. She says it causes insanity. Naruto laughed. Insanity? I eat ramen 2 to 3 meals a day, and look at me. Actually, Tazuna replied, I think you're where she got the idea in the first place. Tazuna smirked to himself as he watched Naruto grumble. But he continued, I hear there's a great 24-hour ramen stand on the corner of 18th and Swordfish. Naruto blushed. Well, see, I didn't actually bring any money with me, so. Tazuna looked at him for a second and tossed him some money. 1,000 yen. Knock yourself out, kid. Naruto grinned and dashed out the door, calling back over his shoulder. Thanks, old man. Have some things to do this morning. No shuri when I'll be back. The door slammed. Tazuna went back to his tea. Naruto sprinted through town and found the ramen stand exactly where the old man said it would be. He hopped onto a stool and ordered 3 bowls of beef ramen. He didn't have time for a full meal, and while waiting pondered the mystery of why all ramen stands were owned by kind old men with cute daughters to take orders. His musings were short-lived as said cute daughter quickly brought out his ramen. He wasted no time, and a small crowd of people on their way to work had gathered to watch him eat by the time he was finished. Ignoring his fans, he leaped over the crowd and again started to run. He figured he only had about 12 minutes before the sun rose. He arrived at his destination just as the first rays of sun were peeking over the horizon. Everything here was almost exactly as he remembered it, as if this place had been untouched by time. It was really nothing more than a small clearing in the woods, but it was one of Naruto's most important places. It seemed like yesterday he had carried Haku's body here all the way from the bridge, and he was soaked with blood and tears. Sakura had been fawning over Sasuke's injuries, so he and Kakashi had dug 2 graves, carefully placed the bodies in the holes, filled them in, and placed 2 crosses made of bound wood to mark the spot. Naruto had then, with all his strength, taken Zabuza's great sword and slammed it into the dirt. It had also been here, 2 weeks later, that he had sworn to never ignore his heart in favor of what his village told him to do. Those had been some of the most naive words of his life. Kakashi had smiled at him as he said that, Everyone Kakashi loved had died for putting the mission first, but Kakashi had had reason to believe in his village. It was a place of belonging for him, and it was all he had left. As long as a shinobi had a village, the village had to come first. Considering how Konoha treated him, Naruto wasn't sure he could live with that. As he approached the graves, he had his breath taken away. His musings had slowed him down, and dawn was well underway. There was Zabuza's sword, right where he had put it, but the sun's light had ignited the sky and clouds, making the sword look as if surrounded by a halo of fire. Some imperceptible force drew him to it, and as the light reflected red off the exposed part of the blade, he unconsciously reached and grabbed the handle. This, for him, was the embodiment of Zabuza's spirit. Everything the demon of the mist had done or felt had done with this very blade at his side. Part of Naruto screamed at him to let go, turn around, and run back to Konoha, but his decision had been made long ago. He just had never realized it until that moment. "You mean Uzumaki Naruto," he said, as if introducing himself to the sword, and with one sharp pull, he drew it from the ground. He held it up with his right hand, and though significantly taller than Naruto himself was, the sword was surprisingly light. He rested the back of the blade on his other hand and examined it. He had never really taken a close look at the sword before, as he had usually been trying to dodge it. The blade was mostly straight with a short curve at the end. The handle was about half as long as the blade, and was wrapped in some rough material as well as having ridges every 6 inches or so. Both, Naruto imagined, were there to help grip it. In total, he estimated the sword's length at about 7.5 feet. As he looked closer, he saw an inscription. Engraved in the blade, right above the handle was written, Kubikiri Hocho. Naruto snickered. It would be like Zabuza to name his sword. But then again, he supposed, it was also like himself. His examination had only taken a couple of minutes, but the sun was now above the horizon, and Naruto quickly decided that he would need some way to hide the sword before the majority of the populace started to go about their business. He glanced around the clearing again, and with a short prayer and a promise to return, he was rushing back to the edge of town with Kubikiri over his shoulder. He arrived at the edge of town to see, just as he had feared, people getting up and starting to fill the streets. The first thing he saw was a clothing store, so he rushed inside, being careful not to cut the top of the doorframe, and glanced around the store. A young woman who had been working at a sewing machine was now staring rather pointedly at his sword. "Hey lady, I have." Naruto reached into his pocket and grabbed his change from breakfast, 508 yen, "and I need a 7 foot by 4 foot piece of fabric. What can you give me?" The young woman quickly composed herself and thought for a moment. "Do you care about quality? I could give you a piece from the end of a roll, but ends are always frayed on one edge." "I don't care about quality or color, but I would like it soon," Naruto said nervously. He was hoping that no one had recognized the sword, and each second increased the risk. The woman disappeared into a back room and appeared moments later with the requested cloth. It was thick, white, and almost exactly the size he needed. Naruto grabbed the cloth, shoved the money into her hand, spread the cloth over the table, set Kubikiri on it, and stared. It hadn't really occurred to him that he had no idea how to wrap it. The woman, who Naruto now took the time to notice, had a name tag that read Rio, laughed slightly at the flabbergasted look on his face. "Would you like some help with that?" she asked, still giggling. Naruto had the grace to blush. Yeah, I've never wrapped anything before, and it really wouldn't be good if the cloth fell off in the middle of the city," he said a bit uneasily. Rio laughed again and went to the other side of the table. Within a few minutes, she had taught him how to wrap the sword, tucking in the cloth at the ends so it wouldn't come loose. During all this time, Naruto was just marveling that he had just walked into a random store with a 7 foot blade and was being treated with nothing but kindness. He smiled at her and grabbed his newly wrapped sword. "Thanks, Rio-san," he called back as he left the shop. Back in the shop, Rio sighed. She had just sold 2,500 yen worth of high-quality cloth for 508 yen because the boy had been cute. The owner was going to be pissed. Naruto was happily walking down the street with his new cloth-wrapped bundle. He was getting some weird looks, but he had decided that looking weird was much better than looking dangerous. With his minor panic attack over, it was just starting to sink in that he was now a self-declared missing Nin. Though the decision to leave the village left him much more relaxed, he realized that he had a lot to do. He started to make a mental checklist. First of all, he had to change his appearance. Naruto was not so arrogant as to think he could take on the Konoha hunter Nin, so that meant that he had to hide from them. No one could ever recognize him. He also realized with some sadness that he'd have to change his last name. Secondly, he had to learn to use his new sword. This mostly would consist of simple taijutsu training, but Naruto also wanted to learn some of the ninjutsu that Zabuza had used so effectively, most specifically, Kirigakure no Jutsu. Thirdly, he had decided that Zabuza and Haku needed true gravestones, not just the wood crosses he had make with nails. This would require him to earn some money, which he obviously needed to do anyway, but it also meant staying in Wave Country, maybe for as long as 2 months, and that would be cutting it tight. Fourthly and finally, he had to send some kind of message back to Konoha. He wanted to give the impression he was dead, so a suicide note would be appropriate. No one who cared about him would have problems understanding why he would kill himself, and everyone else would celebrate, so that would work out well. The only problem would be that the note would have to come from somewhere far from Wave Country. He would have to think about that. Naruto continued down the street and noticed a couple of sailors staring at his forehead, cursing himself. He realized he had his forehead protector on. He rushed into a side street and shoved it into his pocket before hurrying back to Tizuna's house, annoyed at his own stupidity, but happy that he had at least some vague plans. He opened the door and walked into the now eerily silent house. He knew that Inori had school and Tizuna had to run his business, but it didn't make their absence any more disconcerting. His unease was alleviated slightly when he heard the sound of water running and humming in the kitchen. He peeked his head in to see Tsunami washing the breakfast dishes. He ran upstairs to his room and climbed out the window onto the roof. He found a secluded spot facing away from the road and hid Kubikiri. He then snuck back inside and crept into the kitchen behind Tsunami. He cleared his throat and she jumped, spinning around, only to smile upon seeing who it was. "You've got to learn to make sound when you move, Naruto," she said shakily. "You scared me half to death." As she was collecting herself, Naruto took a moment to think. He didn't want to lie to Tizuna's family, but he also didn't want to leave a trail. He decided not to tell too much of the truth. He was afraid of Hunter Nin more than he was afraid of Tizuna's discovering his lie. "Nah, Tsunami-san," he tried to look embarrassed. "I kinda lost my pack on the way here. I really don't mean to impose, but—" "Stop," Tsunami cut him off and smiled at him. "Father makes enough money that he could buy a new house every week. Your shopping expenses wouldn't even make a mark on the books." "Thanks, Tsunami-san. And by the way, I noticed the monument in that park near the market. Do you know who made it?" Naruto was hoping she did. He had noticed the stonework was superb, probably someone he could hire to carve the 2 gravestones he needed. Tsunami thought for a moment. "I think it was Soba Akira. He runs a stone and metalwork shop near the north end of the city." "Why?" Naruto needed an excuse and suddenly got a great idea. "I was thinking I might stay in the city for a while and figured I'd need to get a job. I thought that any guy who made such an amazing monument to Konoha would be the kind of guy I'd want to work for." Once again, Naruto had to internally laugh at the irony of his words, but he had gotten what he wanted. "So," Naruto started again, "would you be willing to come cloth shopping with me, or am I on my own in this?" Tsunami glanced around at the house, looking a bit harried. "Would it be okay if you shopped on your own, Naruto-kun? I really have a lot of work to do today." She continued apologetically as she reached into her purse. "Will 40,000 yen be enough?" Naruto was ecstatic, but tried not to show it. That much money would normally sustain him for 2 weeks. He was determined to save a large portion of it. He realized she had been holding the money out for half a minute and took it, trying to respond. 40,000 yen? That will be more than enough, but I'm not sure how long it will take and really don't know where to go. My cloths have always been pre-ordered and paid for by the Hokage." Tsunami looked as though she were shocked at the thought of someone having never gone cloths shopping. She grabbed a pad of paper and wrote down an address. Here, Naruto-kun. Start at this shop. The lady who runs it is a friend of mine. If you don't find anything you like there, she'll help direct you. Naruto thanked her profusely for both the money and the advice, and soon found himself back out in the bustling streets. He followed the directions on the paper, but started to get suspicious as the streets started to look familiar. He arrived at the address Tsunami had given him only to start banging his head against the nearest lamppost. Rio sat in her chair staring at the ceiling. Apart from the cute boy with the sword this morning, the day had been really dull. She had finished 3 minor alterations and helped an old lady pick out some socks and was now attempting to count the bumps on the stucco ceiling. All of this essentially meant that she was more than happy for the distraction when she saw cute sword boy smashing his head against a lamppost outside the shop. She walked to the door and called out, "Hey, can I help you with anything?" Naruto glanced around and, realizing he had once again drawn attention to himself, rushed inside the shop. "Yeah, see, I'm looking for some cloths." Rio blinked. "This is a clothing store. Care to be more specific?" Once again, Naruto found himself embarrassed. I really can't be more specific. I've never really shopped for cloths before." Now she was interested. Never shopped before? Rio didn't actually find that hard to believe as she looked at his orange jumpsuit. "Did you at least have something in mind?" Naruto, having never had any choice as to what he wore, found that if he thought about it and looked around the store, he did have some ideas. He wandered over to the pants and started to pull things off the rack. "Nah, Rio-san," he said as he browsed. "Do you know of any good barbers nearby, particularly any who specialize dyeing hair?" If Rio was confused by the question, she didn't show it. "There's an old man who uses some weird technique to make his own dyes. He can supposedly make dyes that alter the roots themselves, but I don't really believe that." 40 minutes later, Naruto had picked out what he thought were enough cloths. He had 2 pair of black pants, a couple white t-shirts, a dark navy vest with all the needed pockets, and new sets of sock and underwear. He was well aware that this ensemble clashed horribly with his hair, but he intended for that to be the next thing he changed. He left the store, after giving Rio a 500 yen tip, happily holding the address of his next destination and wearing his new cloths. He didn't wear a shirt and left the vest unzipped, letting it hang so his seal would show if he molded any chakra. Naruto had a bit more trouble finding the barbershop because the owner had never bothered to put up address numbers and the sign was pretty small. When he did find it, he walked in with every intention of giving the owner a piece of his mind. He took one step in and his mind ground to a halt. The old man was out of within another room, but Naruto sensed what was undeniably chakra manipulation. Cursing whatever luck had caused him to run into Shinobi, he started the seals for Kage Bunshin while backing out of the store. He only managed 2 steps before he felt a kunai at his throat, on the other end of which was a rather pissed-off-looking old man who had just moved faster than Naruto could follow. After his initial moment of panic and realizing that he wasn't dead, he looked at the man. He wasn't wearing a forehead protector. That was good. He did appear to be a barber, and that combined with the fact that he was old made Naruto sure this was the man he was looking for. The only problem was the knife still at his throat. "So, I hear you specialize in hair dye?" Naruto asked, causing the old man to raise an eyebrow. "Yes, you heard correctly, though if you're a customer it's generally preferred if you don't perform jutsus in the shop. I like to keep it clean." The man replied perfectly calmly, as if he weren't threatening Naruto's life. "So then," Naruto asked, "how much do you charge for that special dye of yours?" "I'm looking for the permanent root altering stuff." The man leaned over and studied Naruto's head. 7,000 yen. 4,000 if you have any good stories. Naruto was confused. "Stories? What kind of stories?" The old man's eyebrow rose higher. "You are a missing nin, aren't you?" "I don't see a forehead protector. No village I've heard of has a uniform like that. You're too slow to be an undercover ANBU or hunter nin, and to top it off, you come here wanting permanent hair dye, so I think it's pretty obvious." When he put it like that, Naruto had to agree that it was pretty obvious. That didn't, however, help with the current situation, so he decided to gamble and tell the truth. He had aversions against lying to people who could A. Probably detect his lie and B. Kick his ass. Yeah, I'm a missing Neen, though I really just decided that this morning. After a moment of thought, the old man removed the kunai and dropped it into one of the many pockets in his smock, did a 180 turn, and walked back into the back room. What color? The old man called. It took a second for Naruto to realize that the man was asking about hair dye. A dark maroon, he called back to the man. Naruto had thought carefully about his choice of color. He wanted something drastically different from his current blonde, but not something he wouldn't like. The man emerged holding a bottle and a bucket and gestured towards one of the barber chairs. Naruto sat as the man rubbed an odd chemical into his hair before telling him to rinse his hair in the bucket. Once that was done, the man took out a pair of scissors, started to trim, and told Naruto to start a story. The next hour was one of the most bizarre and interesting of Naruto's life as he and the man exchanged stories of their lives as shinobi. Naruto talked about the mist techniques he wanted to learn and how he hoped to learn them, and the old man told Naruto of missions he had done in years long past. No introductions were made and no names were mentioned. Neither even knew what village the other was from, but both felt as if they knew the other by the end of the cut and die. Naruto gave the man his money, a little salute, and walked out the door with his hair now a dark red. It would be hours later that he would find the small scroll in his pants pocket labeled Beginning and Intermediate Stealth Jutsus and with the mark of the Hidden Mist. Translations: Kubikiri Hocho, Head Chopping Cleaver. Nuke Nin, Missing Nin. Kirigakure no Jutsu, Hidden Mist no Jutsu. Kage Bunshin, Shadow Replication.